The morning light from 3 different suns streamed through the massive windows of the Galactic Military Academy. Students from 17 different worlds sat in perfect rows, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have amazed any human visitor. There were tall blue beings with 6 arms, small furry creatures with large eyes, and crystalline entities that sparkled like living diamonds. Professor Zixtal stood at the front of the lecture hall. His crystalline body caught the light and threw it back in brilliant patterns across the walls. He was one of the most respected teachers at the academy, known for his deep knowledge of military history and his ability to explain complex ideas in simple terms. Today, however, he seemed nervous. The professor looked out at his students and cleared his throat, which created a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Today we will discuss something that many of you have heard whispers about, but never received official information on. We are going to talk about Treaty 847 Alpha, which most beings know as the Human Exclusion Protocols. A wave of excited murmurs swept through the classroom. Every student had heard stories about humans, but very few had ever seen one in person. They were the mysterious species from a small blue world that had joined the galactic community only 300 years ago, which was considered extremely recent by galactic standards. Cadet Thorn raised one of his scaled hands. He was a reptilian from Vega Prime, a world known for producing excellent military officers. His green scales caught the light as he spoke. "Professor, our basic history classes taught us that humans were banned from galactic warfare because they were too aggressive and violent. Is this information correct?" Professor Zixtal's crystalline form flickered in a way that his students had learned meant he was thinking carefully about his answer. That is indeed the official reason given in most textbooks. However, the reality of the situation is far more complex and, I must warn you, quite disturbing. He touched a control panel with one of his delicate crystal fingers, and suddenly, the air above his desk began to shimmer. A 3-dimensional image appeared, showing a beautiful blue and green world orbiting around a bright yellow star. White clouds swirled across the surface, and the students could see vast oceans and large land masses covered in green. "This is Earth," the professor said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "It is the homeworld of approximately 8 billion human beings. When we first made contact with them, we discovered a species that had achieved spaceflight in record time. Most civilizations take thousands of years to develop the technology needed to travel between stars. Humans did it in less than 200 years after they discovered electricity." Cadet Velna, an Etherian with beautiful translucent wings that caught the light like stained glass, leaned forward in her seat. "If they develop technology so quickly, they must be very intelligent. Why would intelligent beings be more violent than others?" The professor's form grew dimmer, which his students knew was a sign that he was about to share something unpleasant. "Intelligence and violence are not opposites, Cadet Velna. In fact, humans are quite possibly the most intelligent species we have ever encountered. Their ability to solve problems and adapt to new situations is remarkable. This intelligence, however, made them more dangerous in warfare, not less." Another student, a floating gas-based being named Cadet Flux, spoke up with a voice that sounded like wind through a tunnel. "Professor, if humans are so intelligent and dangerous, why are they allowed in the galactic community at all? Why not ban them completely?" Professor Zixtal activated another control, and the image of Earth was joined by pictures of human cities, art, music, and scientific discoveries. "Because, Cadet Flux, humans have contributed more to galactic civilization in their 300 years of membership than some species have contributed in thousands of years. They are incredible engineers, artists, scientists, and diplomats. They have solved problems that had puzzled our greatest minds for centuries." The classroom fell silent as the students absorbed this information. It seemed impossible that a species could be both incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous at the same time. "The truth," Professor Zixtal continued, "is that humans were not banned from galactic warfare because they were too aggressive. They were banned because they approach warfare in a way that is completely alien to every other species in the galaxy." At that moment, the rear door of the classroom opened with a soft hiss. All eyes turned to see a figure that most of the students had never seen before. He was relatively small compared to most of the other beings in the room, standing only about 6 feet tall. His skin was a pale pink color, and he had brown hair on the top of his head and smaller amounts on his face. He wore the blue uniform of a galactic observer, but the name tag on his chest read, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force. The human walked calmly to an empty seat near the back of the classroom. His movements were smooth and precise, like a predator that was completely aware of its surroundings. Several of the alien students found themselves unconsciously moving away from him, though they couldn't explain why. Professor Zixtal nodded to the human. Class, this is Lieutenant Morrison. He is here as part of the cultural exchange program between Earth and the Galactic Council. His presence today is particularly relevant to our discussion. Lieutenant Morrison nodded politely to the class but did not speak. There was something about his eyes that made the alien students uncomfortable. They were alert and constantly moving, as if he was automatically analyzing every possible threat in the room. Now, Professor Zixtal continued, before we discuss what makes human warfare so different, I need you to understand something about how the rest of the galaxy conducts military operations. For over 50,000 years, every civilized species has followed the same basic rules when conflicts arise. He activated his projector again, and this time it showed images of space battles between various alien fleets. The battles looked almost like elaborate dances, with ships moving in precise formations and firing weapons that seemed designed to disable rather than destroy. Observe how these battles are conducted, the professor said. Notice that the weapons are designed to disable enemy ships, not destroy them. When a vessel's shields fail, it surrenders and the crew is taken prisoner. The prisoners are treated well and are usually exchanged after the conflict ends. Military bases and ships are valid targets, but civilian populations in their cities are completely off limits. Cadet Thorne looked puzzled. Professor, these rules seem obvious. Why would any civilized species want to kill unnecessarily or harm innocent civilians? Professor Zixtal's form flickered again, and this time there was no mistaking the emotion. It was fear. That, Cadet Thorne, is exactly what we thought when we first encountered humans. We assumed that any species intelligent enough to achieve spaceflight would naturally follow these rules. We were very, very wrong. The classroom fell completely silent. Even Lieutenant Morrison seemed to tense slightly in his seat. The humans, Professor Zixtal said slowly, have a completely different understanding of what warfare means. When other species go to war, they fight to achieve political goals, to gain resources, or to settle disputes. When humans go to war, they fight for only one reason. He paused and looked directly at Lieutenant Morrison. They fight to win. The silence in the classroom stretched for several long moments after Professor Zixtal made his statement about humans fighting to win. The alien students looked confused, as if the professor had just said something that made no sense at all. Cadet Velna was the first to break the silence. Her translucent wings fluttered nervously as she spoke. Professor, I do not understand. Do not all species fight to win when they go to war? What other purpose would there be? Professor Zixtal's crystalline form brightened, which meant he was pleased that she had asked the right question. That is an excellent question, Cadet Velna, and it shows exactly how different human thinking is from the rest of the galaxy. When we say other species fight to win, we mean they fight to achieve their goals. They might want to control a trade route, or claim mining rights to an asteroid field, or force another species to agree to better treaty terms. He activated his holographic projector again, and images of various galactic conflicts appeared in the air above his desk. The students could see sleek alien warships engaging each other in space, but the battles looked almost polite compared to what they had seen in old historical records from more primitive times. Look at these examples, the professor continued. In the border war between the Centauri Federation and the Vegan Empire, the fighting lasted for 6 months. When the Centauri achieved their goal of securing the disputed star system, both sides immediately stopped fighting and began peace negotiations. Total casualties for both sides were less than 3,000 beings. Cadet Thorne raised his scaled hand again. That seems like a reasonable way to conduct warfare. Both sides knew what they were fighting for, and when one side achieved its objective, the fighting stopped. What would humans do differently? Lieutenant Morrison shifted in his seat at the back of the classroom. For the first time since entering the room, he spoke. His voice was calm and steady, but there was something in it that made the alien students pay very close attention. "The problem with your way of fighting," Morrison said, "is that it assumes your enemy will stop being your enemy once you win. Humans learned a long time ago that this assumption is usually wrong." Professor Zixtal nodded toward the human. "Lieutenant Morrison makes an important point. Human military doctrine is based on thousands of years of warfare on their home planet. They developed their ideas about fighting through experience with their own species." The professor changed the holographic display to show images of ancient Earth. The students could see primitive humans in metal armor fighting with swords and spears, then later images of humans with gunpowder weapons, and finally modern human soldiers with advanced technology. "Humans have been fighting wars for their entire recorded history," Professor Zixtal explained. "They have fought wars over territory, resources, religion, politics, and sometimes for reasons that seem completely insane to other species. Through all of this fighting, they learned something that the rest of the galaxy had never needed to learn." Cadet Flux's gaseous form rippled with curiosity. "What did they learn, Professor?" Morrison answered before the professor could speak. "We learned that if you do not completely defeat your enemy, they will come back stronger and angrier than before. We learned that showing mercy to someone who wants to destroy you is often the same as signing your own death warrant." The alien. Students looked shocked at this statement. The idea that an enemy would continue fighting after losing seemed alien to them. In their experience, rational beings accepted defeat and moved on to other methods of achieving their goals. Professor Zixtal brought up another holographic display, this one showing the elegant spires and crystal domes of the Galactic War Council headquarters. "For over 50,000 years, our species have conducted warfare according to what we call the civilized rules of war. These rules were developed by the first galactic civilization and have been refined over millennia." The display showed a long list of rules written in dozens of different alien languages. Military targets only, no attacks on civilian populations, surrender terms must be honored, prisoners of war must be treated with dignity and respect. No weapons of mass destruction, no deliberate destruction of planets or star systems. Cadet Velna looked at the list with approval. "These rules make perfect sense. They ensure that warfare remains a tool of diplomacy rather than becoming simple destruction." "That is exactly right," Professor Zixtal agreed. "War, properly conducted, is simply politics by other means. It is a way to resolve disputes when negotiation fails. The goal is to convince your opponent to accept your position, not to destroy them completely." Morrison stood up from his seat, and several of the alien students instinctively moved away from him. He was not threatening them in any way. But there was something about his presence that triggered deep survival instincts they did not even know they had. "Professor, may I show them something?" Morrison asked politely. Professor Zixtal's form flickered with uncertainty, but he nodded. "Please proceed, Lieutenant." Morrison walked to the front of the classroom, his movements still precise and controlled. He stood next to the holographic projector and looked out at the alien students. "How many of you have ever been in a real fight? Not a training exercise or a simulation, but an actual life or death situation?" The students looked at each other, uncertainly. A few raised tentacles, hands, or other appendages, but most remained silent. "I thought so," Morrison said. "That is not a criticism. Your species have evolved beyond the need for individual violence. You settle disputes through law, negotiation, and social pressure. This is actually a wonderful thing, and I wish humans had been able to do the same." He activated the projector himself, and images of Earth appeared again. This time, however, the images showed human cities with tall walls, human homes with strong locks and security systems, and human children learning martial arts and self-defense. Humans never evolved beyond the need for individual violence, Morrison explained. On our world, there are still predators that hunt humans. There are still humans who choose to use violence against other humans for personal gain. Every human child learns to defend themselves because every human child might someday need to fight for their life. The alien students stared at the images, in fascination and horror. The idea of a world where individuals might need to fight for survival was completely foreign to them. This background shapes how we think about everything, including warfare, Morrison continued. When humans sign your civilized rules of war, we do not see rules. We see suggestions that work only if everyone agrees to follow them, and we know, from experience, that there is always someone who will not follow the rules. Professor Zixtal's form had grown noticeably dimmer. Lieutenant Morrison is referring to what humans call the Geneva Conventions, their own planet's attempt to create civilized rules for warfare. However, they learned that not all humans were willing to follow these rules. Morrison nodded grimly. We call them the Geneva Suggestions because that is what they became when our enemies decided to ignore them. When someone is torturing your captured soldiers using human shields and targeting hospitals and schools, following the rules becomes a luxury you cannot afford. The classroom was completely silent now. The alien students were beginning to understand that they were learning about something far more serious than they had expected. So when the Galactic Council presented us with your rules of warfare, Morrison concluded, our military leaders had the same reaction they always have to such rules. They agreed to follow them as long as the enemy followed them too. But they also prepared for what would happen when the enemy inevitably broke the rules. Professor Zixtal's voice was barely audible when he spoke again. And that preparation, class, is what led to the events we will discuss next. Professor Zixtal moved to his control panel and began adjusting the holographic display. The peaceful images of galactic civilization faded away, replaced by the cold darkness of space surrounding a small red star. Several planets orbited the star, and space around them was filled with the lights of ships and stations. This is the Proxima Centauri system, the professor announced. 3 years after humans joined the galactic community, this system became the site of what we now call the Proxima Incident. It was the first time humans participated in an actual galactic conflict, and it changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The alien students leaned forward in their seats, eager to finally learn about the mysterious event that had led to the human ban. Even Lieutenant Morrison seemed more alert, though his expression remained carefully neutral. The conflict began as a simple trade dispute, Professor Zixtal continued. The hegemony of Kelos had claimed mining rights to the asteroid belt in this system. The Trade Federation argued that their claim was older and more valid. Both sides had legal arguments, but neither would accept the ruling of the Galactic Trade Court. Cadet Thorne raised his scaled hand. Professor, trade disputes happen all the time. Why did this one lead to warfare? An excellent question, the professor replied. The Kelos discovered that the asteroids contained large deposits of quantum crystals, which are essential for faster-than-light communication. Both sides decided that the economic value was worth fighting for. The holographic display showed sleek ships arriving in the system. Some had the flowing, organic curves typical of Kelos design, while others had the angular, practical shapes favored by the Trade Federation. The two fleets took positions on opposite sides of the asteroid belt and began the careful, ritualized process of galactic warfare. The initial engagement followed all proper protocols, Professor Zixtal explained. Both fleets exchanged formal declarations of intent to use force. They established safe zones for civilian traffic and agreed on rules for prisoner exchange. The fighting that followed was textbook civilized warfare. Cadet Velna watched the holographic battle with interest. It looks almost like a dance, Professor. Very elegant and controlled. That is exactly right, the professor agreed. Both sides used non-lethal weapons designed to disable ships rather than destroy them. When a vessel's shields failed, it would surrender, and its crew would be taken prisoner. The battle continued for several weeks with minimal casualties. The display showed the slow, careful progression of the battle. Ships would engage each other at long range, exchange fire until one side's defenses failed. Then the losing ship would surrender and withdraw. It looked more like an elaborate sporting event than a life-or-death struggle. After 6 weeks of fighting, the Trade Federation decided they needed additional support. Professor Zixtal continued. They had heard about human military capabilities and decided to hire human forces as mercenaries. Lieutenant Morrison spoke up from the back of the room. The Federation offered us a standard mercenary contract. We were to provide fleet support and follow all galactic warfare protocols. Our commanding officer was General Lisa Park, a veteran of the Sol Defense Wars. The holographic display showed new ships arriving in the system. Unlike the elegant vessels of the other species, the HFY human ships were clearly built for a different purpose. They were angular and heavily armored with weapon systems that looked far more aggressive than anything the alien students had seen before. Cadet Flux's gaseous form rippled with confusion. Those ships look very different from standard galactic designs. Why do humans build their warships to look so threatening? Morrison's expression became grim. Because they are not designed to look threatening. They are designed to be threatening. Human warships are built to destroy enemy vessels as quickly and efficiently as possible. Professor Zixtal nodded sadly. This difference in design philosophy should have warned us about what was coming, but we assumed that human commanders would follow the same rules as everyone else. The display showed the human fleet taking position alongside the Trade Federation forces. For several hours, the battle continued in the same controlled manner as before. Human ships engaged Kelos vessels with what appeared to be standard non-lethal weapons, and everything seemed normal. General Park followed the rules exactly for the first 6 hours of combat, Morrison said. She disabled enemy ships without destroying them, accepted surrenders, and avoided civilian targets. Then something happened that changed everything. The holographic display focused on a single human ship, a large vessel with the name UES Nevada marked on its hull. The students watched as a Kelos torpedo penetrated the ship's shields and struck the vessel directly. Unlike the controlled explosions they had seen before, this impact tore the ship apart in a massive fireball. The Nevada was hit by a Kelos experimental weapon, Professor Zixtal explained quietly. The Kelos commander had decided to test a new torpedo design without informing anyone. Instead of disabling the human ship, the weapon destroyed it completely. Morrison's voice was barely controlled as he continued the story. 312 human crew members died instantly. They were the first humans killed in galactic warfare. The alien students watched in shock as the holographic display showed the human fleet's response. Instead of the measured retaliation they expected, every human ship suddenly changed course and began moving toward the Kelos fleet at maximum speed. General Park's response was immediate and terrifying, Professor Zixtal said. She sent a single message to the Kelos commander. You have chosen to escalate this conflict beyond civilized warfare. We will respond in kind. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galactic community had ever seen. The human ships abandoned all pretense of non-lethal engagement and began targeting Kelos vessels with weapons designed to completely destroy them. Within 2 hours, half of the Kelos fleet had been reduced to debris. Cadet Thorne's scales had turned pale with shock. But Professor, that response was completely disproportionate. One ship destroyed does not justify destroying an entire fleet. Morrison turned to look at the reptilian cadet. You are thinking like a galactic citizen. Humans think differently. When someone kills our people with an illegal weapon, we do not see it as a single incident. We see it as proof that our enemy has abandoned all rules and will do anything to win. The holographic display showed the Kelos fleet trying to retreat, but the human ships pursued them relentlessly. Any Kelos vessel that tried to surrender was ignored. The humans seemed determined to destroy every enemy ship in the system. The Kelos commander sent multiple surrender offers, Professor Zixtal continued. General Park rejected them all. She said that the Kelos had chosen to make the conflict about survival rather than territory, so survival would determine the outcome. But the most shocking part was yet to come. The display showed the human fleet changing course again, this time heading toward the inner planets of the system where Kelos had established mining operations and supply bases. General Park ordered attacks on Kelos infrastructure, Morrison said, his voice heavy with the weight of history. Shipyards, manufacturing facilities, supply depots, orbital platforms, anything that supported the Kelos war effort became a target. Cadet Velna's wings were trembling now. but professor civilian workers operated those facilities. The rules clearly state that civilian targets are forbidden. General Park's response to that concern became one of the most quoted statements in galactic military history. Professor Zixtal said grimly. When the Trade Federation reminded her about civilian casualties, she replied, "They should not have built weapons if they did not want to be part of the war." The alien students watched in horror as human ships systematically destroyed every Kelos installation in the system. The attacks were precise and efficient, clearly designed to eliminate the enemy's ability to continue fighting rather than simply to win a tactical victory. Within 48 hours of the Nevada's destruction, the Kelos forces had no choice but to surrender unconditionally. Professor Zixtal concluded. They had lost their entire fleet, all their infrastructure in the system, and their ability to continue the war. The classroom fell silent as the implications sank in. The alien students were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about civilized warfare. The Kelos commander's final message to General Park was a single question, Morrison said quietly. He asked, "What kind of species fights a war as if their entire civilization depends on the outcome?" General Park's answer was simple: a species that has learned what happens when you lose. The silence in the classroom after Lieutenant Morrison's last statement was heavy and uncomfortable. The alien students sat motionless, trying to process what they had just learned about the Proxima incident. Professor Zixtal allowed the silence to continue for several minutes before speaking again. "I can see that you are all struggling to understand what happened at Proxima," the professor said gently. "This is natural. The human response violated every principle of civilized warfare that our species have followed for thousands of years. However, the Proxima incident was not an isolated event." He activated his holographic projector again, and this time it showed a star map of the galaxy with dozens of red markers scattered across it. Each marker pulsed with a soft light, and there were far more of them than the students had expected. Each of these markers represents a conflict where human forces were involved after Proxima, Professor Zixtal explained. Over the next 2 years, humans participated in 17 different military operations across the galaxy. In every single case, the pattern was the same. Cadet Thorne leaned forward, his reptilian features showing deep concern. "Professor, do you mean that humans destroyed everything in all of these conflicts?" "Not exactly," the professor replied. "In most cases, the enemy surrendered before humans could implement their full response. Word of what happened at Proxima spread quickly through the galaxy. Most military commanders decided that surrender was preferable to facing human-style warfare." Lieutenant Morrison stood up again and walked to the front of the classroom. The alien students watched him with a mixture of fascination and fear. He seemed so ordinary, so calm and reasonable, yet he represented something that had terrified the entire galaxy. "The problem was not that we wanted to destroy everything," Morrison said. "The problem was that we could not make other species understand our way of thinking about warfare. When we fight to end the threat permanently." Professor Zixtal brought up a new holographic display, this one showing ancient Earth. The students could see primitive human settlements surrounded by high walls, with armed guards watching for danger. The images moved forward through time, showing the evolution of human military technology and tactics. "To understand human warfare, you must understand human history," the professor explained. "Humans evolved on a world filled with dangerous predators. They developed in an environment where failure to completely defeat an enemy often meant death for the entire tribe." The display showed human armies throughout their history: ancient warriors with bronze weapons, medieval knights in armor, soldiers with gunpowder weapons, and finally modern human military forces with advanced technology. In every era, the battles looked brutal and decisive. "Humans have been fighting wars for over 10,000 years, Morrison said. In that time, we learned some very hard lessons. We learned that enemies who escape will return stronger. We learned that showing mercy to someone who wants to kill you is often the same as committing suicide." Cadet Velna raised one of her delicate hands. "But Lieutenant Morrison, surely some of your enemies were reasonable beings who could be negotiated with after they lost a battle?" Morrison's expression became sad. Some were, yes. But we also fought enemies who would pretend to surrender, then attack when we lowered our guard. We fought enemies who would use our mercy against us, who would take our prisoners and torture them to death. We learned that in war, you cannot afford to assume your enemy shares your values. The holographic display changed to show a detailed analysis of human military doctrine. The alien students could see charts and diagrams that outlined human strategic thinking, and every principle seemed designed for maximum efficiency in destroying enemies. This is what galactic military analysts call the doctrine of overwhelming response, Professor Zixtal said. When humans decide that military action is necessary, they do not seek to achieve minimal objectives. They seek to eliminate the enemy's ability to threaten them ever again. Cadet Flux's gaseous form rippled with confusion. But Professor, that approach seems unnecessarily violent. Why not use just enough force to achieve your immediate goals? Morrison answered before the professor could respond. Because immediate goals are not enough to ensure long-term survival. If we defeat an enemy fleet but leave their shipyards intact, they will build new ships and attack us again. If we destroy their military but leave their government in place, they will rebuild their forces and plan revenge. The professor activated another display, this one showing the Battle of Rigel 7. The students watched as a small human fleet faced a much larger enemy force from the insectoid hive species. The hive was known for their aggressive expansion and their refusal to negotiate with other species. Admiral Carol Smith commanded the human forces at Rigel 7. Professor Zixtal explained. She was outnumbered 3-1 by hive ships, which were known for their advanced defensive capabilities. Standard galactic doctrine would have called for a defensive position and eventual withdrawal. The students watched as the human fleet took an unexpected approach. Instead of engaging the hive ships directly, the human vessels moved to positions around the system's asteroid belt. Then something extraordinary happened. Admiral Smith ordered what humans call kinetic bombardment. Morrison said quietly. She used the asteroid belt as ammunition. The holographic display showed human ships using gravity manipulation technology to accelerate massive asteroids to incredible speeds. The asteroids became weapons of devastating power, striking hive installations with the force of nuclear explosions. Cadet Thorne's scales had turned almost white with shock. Professor, that is planetary bombardment. Such weapons are forbidden by every galactic treaty. Technically, Admiral Smith did not use prohibited weapons. Professor Zixtal corrected. She used naturally occurring asteroids and existing human technology. No galactic law specifically forbade using asteroids as projectiles, because no one had ever imagined that anyone would do such a thing. The display showed the results of the bombardment. Hive installations across 3 different planets were completely destroyed. The hive fleet, faced with the choice between retreat and watching their entire civilization be wiped out, surrendered within hours. Admiral Smith's report to Galactic Command was very simple, Morrison continued. She said, "The hive represented a threat to human colonies in this sector. The threat has been eliminated." When asked about the massive destruction she had caused, she replied, "I was not ordered to minimize damage. I was ordered to protect human interests." Professor Zixtal's crystalline form had grown very dim. The galactic community was horrified by what they saw at Rigel 7. The idea that someone would use planets themselves as battlegrounds was beyond anything we had imagined possible. Cadet Velna's voice was barely a whisper. "Professor, would humans really destroy entire worlds to win a war?" Morrison looked directly at her when he answered. "If destroying a world was the only way to protect human lives and human civilization, yes, we have a saying, peace through superior firepower. We do not start wars, but we finish them." The alien students sat in stunned silence as they absorbed this information. They were beginning to understand that humans approached warfare with a mentality that was completely alien to the rest of the galaxy. The most disturbing part, Professor Zixtal continued, was that human military leaders seemed genuinely confused by the galactic reaction to their tactics. They could not understand why other species were upset about the complete destruction of enemy forces. Morrison nodded grimly. From our perspective, we were being efficient and merciful. We ended conflicts quickly with minimal human casualties. The fact that enemy casualties were high seemed irrelevant, since they had chosen to fight us in the first place. The professor brought up one final display, showing casualty reports from all the conflicts where humans had been involved. The numbers were shocking. In every case, human losses were minimal, while enemy losses were catastrophic. This data convinced the Galactic Council that something had to be done, Professor Zixtal said. Human effectiveness in warfare was so overwhelming that it threatened to destabilize the entire galactic balance of power. Morrison returned to his seat, leaving the alien students to contemplate what they had learned. The galaxy was not prepared for a species that treated warfare as a problem to be solved permanently, rather than a game to be played by rules. Professor Zixtal turned off all the holographic displays and faced his students directly. The classroom seemed darker without the glow of the projectors, and the alien students could feel the weight of everything they had learned pressing down on them. The professor's crystalline form flickered with what they had learned to recognize as deep concern. "Now you have seen the evidence," Professor Zixtal said slowly. "You understand how humans conduct warfare and why their methods terrified the galactic community. But I have not yet told you the real reason why Treaty 847 Alpha was created." The students looked confused. They had assumed that the overwhelming human victories and the massive destruction they had witnessed were exactly the reasons for the treaty. Cadet Thorne was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "Professor, surely the treaty was created because humans were too effective at warfare. The evidence you have shown us proves that human military capabilities far exceed those of any other species." Professor Zixtal's form brightened slightly, which meant he was pleased that his student was thinking logically. However, his response surprised everyone in the room. "That is what most beings believe, Cadet Thorne, but it is not the truth. The Galactic Council was not afraid of human military power. They were afraid of something much worse." Lieutenant Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time since entering the classroom, he looked genuinely nervous about what the professor was going to reveal. "The real fear," Professor Zixtal continued, "was not that humans would destroy their enemies. The real fear was that other species would learn to fight like humans." The silence that followed this statement was absolute. The alien students stared at their professor in complete bewilderment. The idea that other species might want to copy human warfare methods had never occurred to them. Cadet Velna was the first to find her voice. "Professor, why would any civilized species want to adopt such destructive methods of warfare?" "Because they work," Morrison said quietly from the back of the room. "Because in 17 conflicts human forces never lost a single battle. Because our methods end wars quickly and decisively." Professor Zixtal nodded sadly. "Lieutenant Morrison is correct. After each human victory, military analysts from dozens of species studied human tactics and strategies. They began to understand that human methods, while brutal, were incredibly effective." The professor activated his display one more time, but instead of showing battles, it showed meeting rooms and conference halls filled with alien military leaders. The students could see charts and diagrams that clearly showed human battle tactics being analyzed and discussed. Within 6 months of the Rigel 7 incident, 12 different species had submitted requests to purchase human weapons technology, Professor Zixtal revealed. 23 species requested training exchanges with human military academies. The Centauri Federation actually offered to hire human generals to reorganize their entire military structure. The implications of this information hit the alien students like a physical blow. They were beginning to understand that the problem was not just human warfare, but the possibility that human warfare might spread throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council realized something terrifying, the professor continued. If human methods became widespread, the careful balance that had maintained peace for 50,000 years would collapse completely. Cadet Flux rippled with agitation. "But Professor, surely other species would not abandon the civilized rules of war just to become more effective in battle." Morrison stood up again and walked to the front of the classroom. His presence seemed to fill the room with tension, even though he had made no threatening moves. You underestimate the appeal of winning. When your enemies start using human tactics against you, following the old rules becomes suicide. Professor Zixtal brought up a simulation on his display, showing what galactic warfare might look like if all species adopted human methods. Students watched in horror as peaceful conflicts escalated into campaigns of total destruction. Entire star systems were wiped clean of life as opposing forces sought to eliminate each other completely. This simulation was created by the Galactic Strategic Planning Council, the professor explained. It shows what would happen if human-style warfare became the galactic standard. The council estimated that within 50 years, half of all known civilizations would be extinct. The alien students stared at the simulation in shocked silence. They could see their own homeworlds burning in the projected conflicts, their entire species reduced to nothing because warfare had become a contest of mutual annihilation. The council faced an impossible choice, Professor Zixtal continued. They could allow human participation in galactic warfare and watch civilization collapse into endless cycles of total war. Or they could find a way to isolate human military influence. Morrison's voice was heavy with resignation as he spoke. They offered us a deal: full membership in galactic civilization in exchange for voluntary exclusion from all military conflicts. We could be diplomats, traders, scientists, artists, anything except soldiers. Cadet Thorne looked confused. But Lieutenant Morrison, surely humans could have refused such an offer. Your military power was clearly superior to anything the galaxy could field against you. Yes, Morrison replied. We could have refused. We could have fought the entire galaxy if necessary, and we probably would have won. But our leaders understood something that the rest of the galaxy was afraid to admit. Professor Zixtal's form dimmed to almost complete darkness. Human leaders realized that their way of warfare would eventually destroy everything they were trying to protect. If every conflict became a war of extinction, there would be nothing left worth fighting for. The professor brought up images of Earth, showing the beautiful blue world that was the human homeworld. Humans agreed to the treaty not because they were forced to, but because they understood that their own methods would ultimately lead to the destruction of galactic civilization, including their own. Morrison nodded grimly. We chose isolation over escalation. Our military leaders knew that if other species learned to fight like us, the galaxy would become like ancient Earth, where wars lasted for decades and entire civilizations were wiped out. Cadet Velna's wings were trembling as she asked the question that everyone was thinking. Professor, what prevents humans from simply changing their minds about the treaty? What stops them from deciding that isolation is no longer acceptable? The classroom fell silent as Professor Zixtal and Lieutenant Morrison exchanged a meaningful look. Finally, the professor answered in a voice that was barely audible. Nothing, he said simply. Nothing prevents humans from withdrawing from the treaty except their own choice to honor it. Morrison walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. Every major diplomatic decision in the galaxy now includes human observers, he said. Not because we demand to be included, but because the galaxy has learned that it is better to have us inside the discussion than outside it. He paused and looked back at the alien students one final time. The treaty works because everyone understands what would happen if it failed. The galaxy stays peaceful because we choose to let it stay peaceful. Professor Zixtal's voice was filled with a mixture of respect and fear as he delivered his final lesson. The most dangerous enemy is not one who wants to destroy you, class. The most dangerous enemy is one who has the power to destroy you but chooses not to, because that choice can be changed at any time. Morrison opened the door to leave but turned back one last time. My grandfather fought at Proxima. Before he died, he told me something that still haunts every human military leader. He said, "We held back. Even when we thought we were being ruthless, we were still holding back. The galaxy has no idea what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized." The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving the alien students alone with Professor Zixtal. They sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the terrible truth about Treaty 847 Alpha. The real reason humans are banned from galactic warfare Professor Zixtal concluded, is not because they are too aggressive. It is because they are too good at it, and because the galaxy is not ready for everyone else to become as good as they are. Outside the classroom, Lieutenant Morrison walked slowly toward the transport bay. He carried with him the weight of his species' reputation and the knowledge that peace in the galaxy depended on human restraint. In the depths of space, human patrol ships continued their lonely vigil, protecting a galaxy that feared them while serving as a constant reminder of what civilization could become if it forgot the difference between winning a war and surviving one.